Imagine you're standing inside the Great Pyramid of Giza, not at the entrance, not in the ascending passage, not in the Queen's chamber, in the King's chamber, the room that sits at the geometric heart of the most studied structure in human history, 41 meters above the plateau, reached by crawling through a narrow-angled passageway and then climbing a steep, corbelled gallery that rises through the interior of the pyramid for nearly 50 meters before opening into this room. The first thing you notice is the absolute silence. No sound from outside penetrates this deep. No wind, no traffic, no crowd noise from the tourist lines that circle the base of the pyramid far below you. Just the sound of your own breathing, slightly labored from the climb, and the faint creak of whatever tour group is somewhere in the passages behind you. The second thing you notice is the granite. The walls are red Aswan granite, not limestone, which makes up the vast bulk of the 2.3 million blocks in the pyramid structure. Granite. Each wall slab is approximately 5 meters tall and weighs somewhere in the range of 25 to 50 tons. Above your head, 9 flat granite beams span the width of the chamber. Each beam weighs between 25 and 80 tons. They came from Aswan, the quarries at the first cataract of the Nile, 800 kilometers to the south. Every single one of them was transported overland and by river, lifted 41 meters into the interior of a structure that did not yet exist when they were cut, and set in place with such precision that most of the joints between them would not accept a playing card. They have been holding their position for approximately 4,500 years without a millimeter of movement. You run your hand along one of the wall slabs. The surface is smooth in a way that feels wrong. Wrong for stone cut by hand tools, wrong for a rough-hewn quarry product, wrong for anything that should be achievable in the 26th century BCE using copper chisels and wooden mallets. The smoothness comes from what researchers call grinding and polishing, the final finishing step in a process that began with copper saws loaded with quartz sand abrasive, progressed through progressive stages of abrasion, and ended in a surface that a 21st century machinist would evaluate as a professional result, in a room that nobody was ever supposed to see from the outside, in a chamber built specifically to contain the body of a man who had been dead for 4,500 years. This is the room where the question starts. Over the past 2 years, users of xAI's Grok, the AI developed by Elon Musk's company specifically to engage with questions that other AI systems avoid or deflect, have been asking a question that human beings have been asking since the ancient Greeks first visited Egypt and stood at the base of these structures in bewilderment. Who built the pyramids? And the answer that a rigorous, evidence-based AI synthesis produces when it runs through everything that archaeology, genetics, forensic analysis, particle physics, and 4,000 years of accumulated scholarship have established is something that satisfies part of the mystery completely, deepens another part significantly, and leaves a third part more open than it has ever been. Here is what Grok found. And here is why the complete answer in all 3 of its dimensions is genuinely surprising. The first part of the answer, who, has now been established with a level of certainty that the scientific community describes as settled. The people who built the Great Pyramid of Giza were ancient Egyptians. Specifically, they were organized under the authority of Pharaoh Khufu of the 4th dynasty, working during a construction period that lasted approximately 20 years, beginning around 2560 BCE. They were not slaves. They were not foreign workers. They were not, by any interpretation of the available evidence, anything other than Egyptian. We know this because of a piece of papyrus, specifically because of several hundred fragments of papyrus that French archaeologist Pierre Tallet found in a sealed storage cave at a remote Red Sea harbor called Wadi al-Jarf in the spring of 2013. These papyri, now understood to be the oldest written documents ever found in Egypt, and among the oldest in the world, are the daily journal of a man named Merer. He was a mid-ranking official, an inspector of logistics, responsible for a team of approximately 200 men who transported limestone blocks from the quarries at Tura, on the eastern bank of the Nile, about 15 kilometers south of Giza, to the construction site. The papyri cover a period of several months, and they read exactly the way a foreman's logbook reads. Date, task completed, quantity, destination, route, stopover locations. Merer references Pharaoh Khufu by one of his royal names. He mentions the specific harbor at Giza and the canal system that fed it. He describes the limestone he was transporting as the white casing stone that would eventually cover the outside of the pyramid in a smooth, reflective surface, described in other texts as the horizon of Khufu, visible from miles away as it caught the desert sun. The papyri were found 300 miles from Giza, in a harbor facility that had been sealed when the construction was complete. They survived because the cave was closed, the desert air was dry, and nobody opened it for 4,500 years. They are not a legend. They are not an interpretation. They are an eyewitness operational document, written by a man who was physically present in real time during the final years of the Great Pyramid's construction. The physical infrastructure of the workforce that Merer's diary describes from the supply chain side was found on the Giza Plateau itself. Beginning in 1988 and continuing for decades thereafter, American archaeologist Mark Lehner and his team at the Ancient Egypt Research Associates excavated a purpose-built settlement southeast of the pyramids that Egyptologists call Hayt el Ghurab, the lost city of the pyramid builders. It is not a myth. It is a grid-planned urban settlement with parallel barracks capable of housing rotating workers, bakeries large enough to produce bread at industrial scale, breweries, food storage facilities, administrative offices, and a fully equipped medical facility. The workers buried in the cemetery 500 meters away show healed broken bones, evidence of successful surgical procedures on severe head wounds, and the kind of managed recovery from serious injury that you only undertake for a workforce that is valuable, not for slaves, for skilled professionals that the state had invested in and needed to return to function. The graffiti inside the pyramid's relieving chambers, the spaces above the king's chamber discovered by Colonel Howard Vyse in 1837 and still accessible today, record the names of the work gangs that placed those granite beams. Friends of Khufu, drunkards of Menkaure. These are not the anonymous markings of enslaved people with no collective identity. They are the signatures of organized teams who had group names, who competed with other teams, who had enough of a sense of belonging to leave their name on a block that would be sealed inside the pyramid for thousands of years after they were gone. Who built the pyramids? Egyptian workers, organized, compensated in food, housing, medical care, and the specific social status that came from working on the most ambitious construction project their civilization had ever undertaken. The answer to the first question is settled. It always was, for anyone willing to look at the evidence rather than the mythology. The second part of the answer, how, is where the picture becomes genuinely more interesting, and where Grok's synthesis of the complete evidence record produces something that most popular accounts of pyramid construction consistently fail to convey. The how is not one answer. It is a system of interlocking answers, and one of the most important pieces of that system was only discovered in 2018 at an alabaster quarry in the eastern desert of Egypt called Hatnub. A joint team from the French Institute for Oriental Archaeology in Cairo and the University of Liverpool's Department of Archaeology. Classics and Egyptology uncovered the remains of a 4,500-year-old ramp system that dates to the reign of Khufu himself. What makes this ramp different from every previous ramp theory is its design. It is not a long, shallow, inclined plane of the kind that would have required as much stone to build as the pyramid itself. It is a steep central ramp, running at a gradient of approximately 20% or more, far steeper than any ramp previously considered viable for stone transport, flanked by two staircases with carefully cut post holes running along both sides. Yannis Gordon, co-director of the excavation, explained the mechanism to Live Science when the discovery was announced. A sled carrying a stone block was attached with ropes to wooden poles inserted into those post holes, and workers on the staircases used the poles as anchor points to pull the sled upward against the steep gradient. The ropes acted as what Gordon called a force multiplier. The physics of roping around a fixed point reduces the effective force needed to move a heavy load up a steep incline. This system, short, steep, staircase-flanked ramps using rope leverage against fixed wooden posts, would solve one of the most persistent engineering objections to external ramp theories. A long, shallow ramp that could accommodate heavy loads going steadily upward would require so much additional material to build and maintain that the construction effort for the ramp itself might approach the construction effort for the pyramid. The Hatnub ramp design eliminates that objection by using a much steeper gradient with mechanical advantage, requiring far less total material. It also explains something that has puzzled pyramid researchers for decades: the massive quantities of wooden post material found in excavations around 4th Dynasty construction sites, for which no other compelling use had been proposed. But Hatnub is an alabaster quarry, not a pyramid construction site. The ramp system explains how heavy blocks were moved out of quarries at steep angles. Getting those blocks from the quarry to the boat, down the Nile to Giza, through the harbor canal that Mayer's diary describes, and then assembled into the pyramid. Each of these stages had its own specific engineering challenge. The wet sand solution, demonstrated by experimental archaeologist work and confirmed by ancient Egyptian artwork that shows water being poured in front of sleds moving on desert sand, explains horizontal transport. Water reduces the friction coefficient of sand by approximately half, making it possible for a team of workers to pull a heavy stone on a sled across the desert floor with manageable effort. The number of workers required for a given block weight scales with the available friction, and with wet sand, teams of 20 or 30 men become sufficient for blocks in the 2 to 3 ton range that made up the bulk of the pyramid structure. The arithmetic of the construction, worked through by Mark Lehner and others using Mayer's diary data and the known total block count of 2. 3 million stones averaging 2, 5 tons each over approximately 20 years of construction, resolves to a specific pace, roughly 300 blocks placed per day, sustained continuously across the full construction period. In working hours, that means one block approximately every 5 minutes. That rate is not intuitively impossible. It is demanding, it requires precise coordination across the entire supply chain from quarry to placement, and it requires a logistical organization comparable to a large modern industrial operation, but it is a number that the documented workforce size and the documented transportation methods can support. It is not magical. It is industrial. It is what a Bronze Age state running at the absolute maximum of its organizational and technical capacity can achieve when it commits to a single project for a generation. The casing stones, the smooth white Tura limestone that once covered the entire exterior surface of the pyramid and made it visible from the horizon, are documented in Merer's diary as his specific cargo. They are gone now, stripped off during the medieval period to build mosques and palaces in Cairo, leaving the stepped surface visible today. But the core is what it has always been. 3 million blocks, placed one at a time, by organized teams of Egyptian workers who left their names on the stones and their bones in the cemetery outside the city where they lived. The third part of the answer, what is inside, is where the picture becomes most genuinely unsettling, and where the discovery of the last decade has opened questions that no previous generation of researchers even knew to ask. In 2017, the Scan Pyramids Project, an international collaboration using muon radiography, a technique that maps the density of structures by detecting the cosmic ray particles that stream through them from above, announced a finding that produced a specific and uncomfortable silence across the Egyptological community. Above the Grand Gallery, the soaring, core-belled passageway that climbs through the center of the pyramid toward the king's chamber, the muon detectors registered a signal consistent with a large void, approximately 30 meters long and at least 5 meters tall, running parallel to and directly above the Grand Gallery. Not a construction gap, not an accidental space. A deliberately created void of substantial dimensions that does not appear on any architectural plan, that is not mentioned in any ancient text, and for which no confirmed function has ever been proposed. In 2023, the same project used refined muon radiography combined with ground-penetrating radar and ultrasonic testing to characterize a second undocumented space, a 9-meter corridor immediately behind the north face of the pyramid, running horizontally and accessible by an endoscopic camera that was inserted through a small opening in 2023. The camera revealed a vaulted ceiling and bare limestone walls. The corridor's purpose is unknown. It may be structural, a feature designed to redistribute the weight load above the main entrance. It may be something else. Nobody knows. The space has been physically confirmed. Its purpose has not been established. Grok's synthesis of the complete pyramid evidence record produces something more nuanced and more honest than the binary debate between ancient astronauts and standard textbook explanations has ever managed. The who is settled. Egyptian workers, documented by their own foreman's diary. The how is substantially but not completely understood. A specific and well-evidenced toolkit of copper and sand abrasion, water and sledge transport, steep rope leverage ramps, an industrial-scale labor organization that pushed the 4th dynasty Egyptian state to the absolute boundary of what its administrative and technical capacity could achieve. And the what is inside remains genuinely, specifically, confirmedly open. A 30-meter void above the Grand Gallery, a 9-meter corridor behind the north face, and an unknown number of additional spaces that the scanning technology has not yet fully mapped. When Grok was asked who built the pyramids, it did not produce the simple confirmation that textbooks offer or the sensationalism that conspiracy channels require. It produced a layered picture with different levels of certainty attached to each layer. The builders are known. The methods are substantially reconstructible. The internal architecture is still being discovered, and the most important implication of the combined evidence, the thing that makes the answer genuinely shocking to anyone who expected a clean resolution in either direction, is that a structure we have been studying for 4,000 years, that has been measured and photographed and carbon dated and excavated and muon scanned and endoscoped, still contains confirmed physical spaces that nobody has entered, whose purpose nobody has identified, and whose existence nobody suspected until a decade ago. You can walk into the king's chamber today. You can touch the granite walls. You can stand under those 9 beams, each one weighing more than the heaviest truck on the road, and try to understand what it meant to lift them 41 meters off the ground using ropes, sledges, and organized human labor 4,500 years ago. You can know, because the evidence is specific and verified and extensive, exactly who brought them there and roughly how. And then you can look up past those granite beams into the chamber above the chamber above the chamber and know that somewhere in that direction, 30 meters above the Grand Gallery, enclosed in limestone that has not been opened in 4.5 millennia, there is a room that nobody has entered since the pyramid was sealed, that nobody in the modern world knew existed until a muon scanner found it in 2017, that still has no agreed explanation. The pyramids were built by human beings, extraordinary ones, working at the limit of what their civilization could do, organized by a state that had committed everything it had to a project that would outlast it by 45 centuries. That is what Grok found. That is what the evidence says. And the fact that those same human beings left something inside the structure that we still cannot fully explain, that is not a mystery in spite of the evidence. It is a mystery that the evidence has made more specific, more precisely located, and therefore more real than it has ever been before. Subscribe. Because the endoscope went into that north face corridor 2 years ago, and what it saw has still not been fully explained.